We have now reached the moment in this ceremony when we honor an extraordinary individual whose life's work has advanced the cause of education while upholding TC's core mission to foster excellence and equity in the fields we serve. Among those honored at past ceremonies were Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Coretta Scott King, Senator George Mitchell, Pete Seeger, Thomas Friedman, Lee Shulman, Gail Collins, Spike Lee, Linda Darling Hammond, and many others. This year, we are honoring 4 eminent exemplars. Sonia Nieto, Professor Emerita of Language, Literacy, and Culture at the School of Education, University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Temple Grandin, International Champion of Autism Rights and Humane Treatment of Animals. The Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts, pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church and president of Westbury College. And Nobel Laureate Carl Wyman, chairman of the Board on Science Education of the National Academy of Sciences. We will honor Temple Grandin at tomorrow morning's convocation ceremony, and the Reverend Dr. Butts will be honored tomorrow afternoon. Carl Wyman will address the doctoral hooding ceremony on Wednesday afternoon. Professor Nieto will be honored presently and will deliver her remarks. It is now my pleasure to introduce Carmen Roldan Martinez.
Good afternoon and congratulations, graduates. It is my pleasure to invite our medalist, Dr. Sonia Nieto, to join me at the podium. Sonia Nieto, with American public schools now serving a predominantly non-white population, you truly stand as an educator for our times. While others seek to define excellent teaching only by the numbers, you have persistently called attention to the ways that teachers form valuable bonds with students by recognizing and affirming each student's individuality, by giving young people the license to challenge society's prevailing narratives, and by encouraging students to pursue social justice. You argue that these practices, while important for all teachers, are essential for those who work with bicultural and multicultural students. In part, your convictions stem from research. You have found, for example, that a group of Boston public school teachers remain in the profession not for salary or professional advancement, but rather to inspire hope, to express love, anger, and desperation, to engage in democratic practice, and to shape students' futures. In your book, What Keeps Teachers Going, and other writings, you note the absence of these factors from the current official discourse around teacher education. Yet, your work also reflects your own experience as a bilingual, bicultural student in the New York City public schools. In your essay on Becoming American, you write, "Even though I was born in this country and lead a productive professional life in the United States, when I am asked the inevitable question, 'What are you?' I always answer, Puerto Rican." How, you ask, can schooling reconcile the sometimes dramatically differing value systems, languages, and expectations of appropriate behavior that daily confront so-called hyphenated Americans? Your answer, offered in books such as Affirming Diversity, the Sociopolitical Context of Multicultural Education, and Language, Culture, and Teaching, is multicultural education, particularly that which is critical, messy, full of conflict, and rich with the disparate voices of conflict and tension and difference. Sonia, Your work has transformed our ways of thinking about multicultural learners and education. Equally transformative has been your style. The ways in which you have fought and continue to fight the good fight, the relationships you have developed throughout your journey, and the ways you touch people's lives. In this regard, I asked a sample of people who know your work to describe you with a few words, and these were their responses. Sonia is a caring person, cariñosa, nurturing, like a madrina, godmother, always there to be supportive, generosa, a fantastic mentor, brillante y elegante compañera, brilliant and elegant colleague, warm, approachable, personable, sencilla, humble, open, sweet and peaceful, but política, strong, ardent, committed, transformative. You were also described as an inspiring scholar, splendorous and amazing. Dr. Nieto, for being such a great human being and for your prescience in demanding that our society accommodate all diverse learners, for your pioneering work in shaping multicultural teaching, and for your efforts to redefine what does it mean to be American. We are proud to present you with the Teachers College Medal for Distinguished Service.
She wants to say that. Y lo dejamos aquí, ¿no? Sí. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you so much. President Furman, trustees, faculty and administrators, families and guests of the graduates and master's graduates. First, I want to thank you for this magnificent honor. It's especially meaningful to me because I've spent my life in education, particularly among teachers, and here we are at Teachers College, one of the preeminent venues in our nation for preparing teachers and other educators. Graduates, it is my great honor and pleasure to be here with you today as you celebrate this milestone in your lives and careers. I see education as relentlessly exciting and also hopeful, and as the most consequential field and endeavor that you can enter. In the United States, education and democracy have always gone hand in hand, at least in name, if not always in deed. Many other nations have also aligned themselves with this ideal because, after all, what could be more democratic or worthy than a commitment to the education of young people regardless of station, rank, race, religion, or gender? It's an ideal worth fighting for, and many, both in this country and around the world, have given their toil, sweat, and in some cases, even their lives to advance and support it. I've been an educator for nearly 50 years, and in that time, I've been blessed to teach children and adolescents, undergraduates and graduate students, and pre-service as well as practicing teachers and administrators, and I've learned a great deal from them along the way. I'd like to share some of these lessons with you this afternoon. First, I've learned that we need to, quote, start where the students are at. This was the best piece of advice I learned in my own teacher education program when I was studying to be a teacher many years ago at St. John's University in New York. It's a lesson that's come in very handy over the years, not only when it refers to young children, but also in relation to adults. We're all the result of our upbringing and experiences and social context as well, and as a result, we're all limited in our perspectives, in our sensibilities, and in our understandings. When I taught undergraduate students, for example, I needed to start where they were at, rather than blame them for what I might see as narrow-mindedness or naivete. I needed to present them with other ideas, not to change their minds, but to educate them to other possibilities. That's the role of an educator, a role that I've always taken very seriously. So whether you plan to be a classroom teacher or administrator, do professional development with teachers, or become a teacher educator, I hope you'll remember that advice. Another lesson I've learned is this: in order to be the best educator you can be, you need to know yourself. Recognize your talents and strengths, as well as your blind spots and biases. Most recently, this was brought home to me by Roger Wallis, a teacher I interviewed for my new book. I interviewed him a few years ago. He's a sixth grade veteran teacher who retired 2 years ago. And in that time, he was the only African-American male teacher in his school for 39 years. When I interviewed him, he said that to be successful with students of diverse backgrounds, you need to, quote, put your stuff away. He was referring to the misperceptions, prejudices, and plain old ignorance that all of us carry with us. Don't look at a young person who doesn't yet speak the national language, in our case English, as, quote, a non-English speaker, but rather as a person who already speaks at least one other language. Don't look at a student being raised by one parent rather than two as fundamentally flawed, or as a student who lives in poverty as uneducable. Reality and our own experience should tell us differently. Roger also said that he learned an important lesson from his stepfather, a skilled carpenter. He said, "There's never a bad piece of wood. There's only wood that needs extra planing." This is a good reminder that the beauty of any piece of wood becomes visible only through hard work and persistence, and that's a good definition of education as well. Roger's sentiments bring us to another lesson I've learned from the teachers and students that I've worked with over the years. In order to be an effective teacher, you need to know your students and remember who they are. Although teaching content is important, whom you teach is just as important as what you teach, and sometimes more. There's no such thing as a generic student. Every student comes to us with his or her own gifts, intelligence, culture, and experience, as well as with specific needs and wants. Learning what those are is one of the central roles of an educator. Here's the example of Ron Morris, a pseudonym for a young student we interviewed over 2 decades ago from my first book. Ron had been unsuccessful in school for many years. He had been suspended, expelled, and even arrested. He complained about the impersonal nature of much of the teaching he had experienced, saying, "You know, when a teacher becomes a teacher, she acts like a teacher instead of a person. She takes her title as now she's mechanical. Teachers shouldn't deal with students like we're machines. You're a person, I'm a person. We come to school and we should all act like people." Ron also spoke about the content he learned. A course in African American history in 8th grade, the first time that he had learned anything about his own background, had riveted him. He said, quote, "I felt comfortable in school once in 8th grade. I'd sit there and I was just so relaxed. I just felt like the realest person on earth." So it's a tall order, I know, but I challenge you to make sure all students, quote, "feel like the realest person on earth." To be wary of received truths is something else that I've learned. Teachers and other educators need to be courageous and learn to confront what they know is wrong. This came up in 2 different interviews I did for my most recent book. Angeles Perez, now an assistant principal in the Houston area, but she was a 4th grade teacher, bilingual teacher when I first interviewed, and Marisela Mesa Buenrostro, a 6th grade teacher in Southern California, were both counseled to, as brand new teachers to, quote, "not smile until Christmas." I know many of you have heard the same advice. Fortunately for their students, they knew in their hearts that this was specious advice. Angeles was astonished at this, saying, "Not smile until Christmas? That means you don't have a relationship with them until Christmas." Marisela, who before her first day of teaching had sleepless nights because of this advice, said, "The day came I saw my students, and everything these teachers told me, I just put to the side. I was myself. I smiled at them. I knew it was going to be important to build that relationship where they feel safe, where I'm not the mean, grumpy teacher who's going to be upset and yelling the whole day, every day. Advice about smiling is a little example, but there are many more far-reaching examples of received truths. For example, that children of some backgrounds are, quote, good with their hands, unquote, while children of other backgrounds are more intellectually inclined. This is a comment I heard from a fellow teacher in the first school in which I taught in Brooklyn many years ago. I hope you also question the idea that incessant high-stakes testing will create smarter students, that the value of teachers can be measured by their students' test scores, and that privatization is the answer to the problems of public education. I hope you challenge all of these so-called truths and others. If not, I fear for the future of public education and its promise of equal opportunity for all students. Another lesson, recognize that teaching is a political endeavor. It can make the difference between a life of hope and promise and one of hopelessness and despair. The recent abduction of schoolgirls in Nigeria is a powerful example of the potential of education. Clearly, educated girls are a threat to the established order. The same could be said about educating African Americans during slavery and later in the South during the Jim Crow era. And if we weren't afraid of the power of education, how is it that we still have so much inequality in education? Education is political in the little things we do, such as how a teacher organizes her classroom, how she lines up her students, or the stories she chooses to read to them during story hour. That education is political is also evident in big things we do, whether it's challenging the corporate takeover of education or fighting for equitable funding for the schools and students most in need. Let me end with a more lighthearted piece of advice. Have a life. Although a life in education can and often is exhausting and time-consuming, it should also be joyful and exciting. One way for this to happen is to create other outlets in your life that are equally joyful and fulfilling. John Nguyen, an award-winning teacher in New Haven who was inspired to become a teacher by his grandfather, a chemistry teacher in Vietnam, is now an assistant principal. When I interviewed him a few years ago, he said he often chases teachers out of the school building by 6 p.m. so that their relationships at home don't suffer, adding that it's important for teachers to, quote, to be humans for once as opposed to always thinking in teacher mode. He explained, quote, you need to have your own personal space and personal time. It's nice during your first few years to be obsessive about teaching, so it gets you better. But there also has to be a time when you have to step away from it. It's hard to do. It took me a bunch of years to figure that out, he said. Another example of having a life. Hyung Nam, a high school teacher in Portland, Oregon, who teaches history, political science, economics, global studies, and the occasional guitar class, described how he recharges by finding beauty all around him, and this is what he said during his interview. Everything from commuting to work by bike as much as possible, seeing a deer off the road or seeing the moon rise, coming home and doing yoga or going out with colleagues for happy hour. I'm also a musician, and I think everything that makes me love the world and love being alive and want the world to be a better place, all of these things help me thrive. So my hope for all of you, may you thrive in all that you do. Your professors, your families, your friends, and I are all very proud of you. Congratulations. Now go out and make your mark. Thank you.